Our starter code today is the completed code from lesson 10. So I've got the package JSON open. Let's just change this name to lesson 11 and save the file. But after that, we also need to add a dependency today. So I'm going to press Control and the backtick to open up the terminal window. And then I'm going to type npm I and then jwt-decode, so we can decode the access token that we're receiving from our backend REST API. And then we're going to use that information inside of that token where we store the username and the roles that we receive for our user. And now we can see we have JWT decode installed in our dependency list here in the package JSON. Now let's move over to the userstories.md, and we've got quite a few here that we haven't checked off, but really we can check off a few, and by the end of this lesson we'll have most of these complete. So the third one, add an employee login to the Notes app. Well, we've done that, and after we add the extra role-based access control and permissions today, this will be completely in place. So I'm just going to check that off now. Number 8, require users to log in at least once per week. Well, we have set our refresh token to expire every 7 days, so that pretty much completes that. And provide a way to remove employee access ASAP if needed. We do have that with the active and inactive state for each employee, and once they log in they can't receive that data if they are inactive, so we can check that off. Now that leaves several others that we can go over. We're not going to check off number 1 today or complete that. Now everything else we've completed in previous lessons, including the ones I just checked off. But now 5 and 6, easy navigation, we'll complete that today. Display current user and assigned roles, we'll complete that today. Number 14, notes can only be deleted by managers or admins. We will add that permission in today for those roles. Anyone can create a note when the customer checks in. So even though we haven't checked this off yet, we really have that in place, but I don't want to check it off until we verify this with the permissions and role-based access control in place. Then there's employees can only view and edit their assigned notes. We will implement that today. Managers and admins can view, edit, and delete all notes. We'll verify that as well today. Only managers and admins can access user settings. We'll take care of that. And only managers and admins can create new users. We will also take care of that. Desktop mode is most important, but should be available in mobile. We will wait on that just like we did with number 1. So we will have those 2 left today for at least the final lesson in this series. But let's save our userstories.md and move on. Let's go to the source directory in our file tree, and from there we're going to open up the hooks directory, and you can see we have one custom hook that is usePersist. Let's create another new file here. Let's call this useauth.js. I'll paste in our imports and we can quickly look at those. We're bringing in useSelector from React Redux, and then our token selector, select current token from our auth slice. After that, we're going to bring in JWT decode from our new dependency, JWT-decode, that we just added in our package JSON. From there, I'm going to type RAFCE with our ES7 snippets. It should quickly create a functional component called useauth. And now that we have that, let's remove the return, as this will be something that starts out with a few values. So let's pull in our token, which is our access token, with our use selector and the select current token selector that's passed into it. And then we're going to set some different values here for is manager, is admin, and status. Right now, false, false, and the status, the default value will be employee. After that, let's go ahead and return some values. And we're going to start off with a username inside of this object that we're returning, and it will just be an empty string. Then we'll have roles, and that will be an empty array. After that, we'll just put in the is manager, is admin, and status. Now this will be what is returned if we don't have a token. But now let's check to see if we do have a token. So we can say if we do have a token, Then let's look at what happens inside of this if statement, because this is where we actually get our values from the access token. So we're going to define decoded, and we're going to decode the token with JWT decode. From there, I'm just going to destructure the username and the roles that are stored inside of that access token. And if you remember from our backend REST API code, we put all of that inside of a user info property inside of the token. So we have decoded.userinfo, and that's where we can destructure the other values, such as username and roles. And now we're just going to set some different values and things that might be useful that we could use anytime we pull this hook in. We don't have to use all of the values. We just want to make this hook very useful for any type of situation that needs to confirm if we have a manager or an admin or just what the username or roles are. So we're going to set this value for isManager to check the roles to see if it includes manager, because it's an array with the different values inside of it. The same for isAdmin. We're just checking for an admin. And then we're going to set the status equal to whatever the highest role is. So we need to check for isManager first, and then we check the status to manager instead of employee that we've set above. Likewise, after checking isManager, we can check for isAdmin, and then anyone who is an admin and a manager will have their status set to admin instead. So we could have named status highest status if we wanted to be very accurate about that, but whatever we're storing in status is the highest role available to that user. And then we're returning the username, the roles array, and then the status isManager and isAdmin. You might think you wouldn't need all of these, and you could go without some of them and create other logic inside of your components, but I think it's better to just handle the logic here, deliver all of the different information in these different forms, and then just destructure out of the hook whatever you need at that current time. Now let's save our new useauth hook, and let's move on to the components directory and go to the -footer.js file. We're going to import our new useauth hook at the very top, and now let's destructure what we need to use inside of the footer. So I'll say const, we're going to pull in the username and the status, and then we'll just set this equal to useauth. And now let's scroll down to our content, and you can see we have the current user and status here available. So let's just put those values in here with username, and then we can put status here as well. So status, and save this file. And now let's see how that looks in our app. And to test our app, we need our backend code running. So I also have the code from lesson 8 running in a separate instance of VS Code. And you can see we have our backend connected to MongoDB. It's running on port 3500 for the local host. And this is our REST API. So now let's go back to the React app code that I have in the other instance of VS Code. Open a terminal window here and type npm start, and the app is up and running. Let's go ahead and go to a login so we can log in and then see our footer that we have in our welcome page. So here we go with Dan D's information, and now we can see in the footer we have current user Dan D and his status is admin. Let's go ahead and log out and check one more. So we'll log in and check Mark, our manager, and we'll enter his credentials, and now we have current user Mark and the status is manager. So our footer is working as expected. I'm going to close the terminal window, and I'll go ahead and close up the components directory for now. Let's move into features and the auth directory where we have our welcome.js file. Now at the top of the welcome.js file, let's once again bring in that useauth hook. And now as the component gets started here, let's bring in the values we need. So we're going to destructure username, and we also want isManager and isAdmin. And we'll bring all of those in from our new useauth hook. And the very first thing we can do is extend our welcome with the username. So let's just put the username right here inside of our H1 with the welcome. After that, let's scroll down. And remember, we only want to allow managers and administrators, admins, to view user settings or add a new user. So let's put some conditional logic around these links. So I will put a curly brace at the beginning and the end, but then at the very beginning, we can check to see if we have an is manager status or an is admin status set to true. And if we do, then we can just use the double ampersand. So now if we have a manager or admin, if either one of these are true, then this link will show for the user settings in this welcome page. Now we can copy this exact same logic and do the same thing for the add new user link. So we'll put this right there, and then we'll put the curly brace at the end, and we have both links now only provided to our admins and managers on this welcome page. And let's go ahead and verify that with Chrome. So right now I'm logged in as a manager Mark, and it is still showing all 4 links. Let me log out, and I'll log in as an employee named Joe, and his only role is employee, and Joe can only view the tech notes or add a new tech note. He does not have the links for the user settings or to add a new user. If we log back out, and we'll log Dan D in, the administrator, and we'll verify here on the welcome page, Dan has all 4 links. Let's go back to VS Code. Before we move on to the header, I just want to point out that yes, I've got this conditional logic in here twice. You could put it once and then of course have a fragment and put both of these links inside. But I wanted to show how to apply this to individual links, and we'll see more of that as we move on to the header and apply it to buttons. But you could do it either way. There's always more than one way to do things, and sometimes I get comments saying you could have done this, but then I think if I had done that, then I would have got a comment saying you could have done what I already did. So either way, just do it the way you want to, but I'm providing it here for each link. Okay, let's move on now back to the components directory and to the dash header. This is where we're going to provide that easy navigation that is in our user stories list, and I'm just going to come down here and add some more lines to our import as we bring in these different icons from Font Awesome, because I need to bring in several more. So now you can see I've got 4 new icons on top of the existing one that we already had. And then underneath our send logout mutation, I'm going to bring in our use auth hook as well. And now scrolling up to start out the component, we're going to go ahead and destructure some information from our use auth hook. So I'll say const, and we need is manager, and we also need is admin, and we'll bring those in from use auth. And now I'll scroll again, and underneath our use effect, I'm going to put in 4 click handlers, all for the new buttons that we're going to add. And you can see each one of the buttons is going to have a different navigation destination. We're bringing in that use navigate hook that we already had to call the navigate function. And so we could go to add a new note, add a new user to the notes list or to the users list, all from the header. We're going to change our is loading and our is error return statements that we have here as well, but I'll come back to that. Right now, I want to go underneath where we defined our dash class, and we'll look at how that dash class is applied, because we created it in a previous lesson, but we really didn't look at the result of it too closely. We've also got a logout button here. Between these two, I'm going to add our 4 other buttons, and we'll look at what they do. So they follow that same pattern that I used before for the dash class and for the logout button. So you can see we're defining the button initially with the keyword let and setting it to null. And then we're using our regexes that we created above in the previous lessons as well. So we had the 3 different regexes here, and we're checking those with conditional logic to see if we want to turn the button from null into something more, if we're going to use that button. And it really depends on the path. So here we're making sure that we are on the notes list essentially with this regex. And if that's the page we're on, then we'll include the new note button. Here we're doing the same for the users list, and then we're including the new user button. Down here we have a user button as well, but now we're making sure that we are not on the users list, and we are also making sure that the path name includes dash, and we're pulling in that path name from the use location hook. But we're also checking to see if we are a manager or an admin. So this is the user button for the users list. So what we're doing really is checking to make sure we're not already on the users list, because then we don't want to provide the button to go to the same page that we're on. But we are making sure that we are in the protected pages with dash, and then we could provide a new user button if we're a manager or an admin. When I said a new user button, this is actually the users list button. Now above, notice we didn't check to see if we were an admin or a manager for the new user button. However, we don't really need to because we have to be an admin or a manager to be on the users list in the first place. And the only place the new user button will appear is if we are on that users list page. And then scrolling down, we have a notes button as well. And this notes button is checking to make sure we're not on the notes list page and that once again we are in the protected pages that start with dash. And you can also see each one of these buttons has the class name icon dash button. This applies back to the CSS that I've created. They all have title attributes as well, and the on click applies to each of the 4 handlers that I supplied above these buttons in the code that we recently put in. Also, they all have their own unique icon that we're bringing in from Font Awesome. Okay, under this, underneath the logout button as well, but let's put it maybe above the content that we define. I want to add an error class like we have previously had in components before, where we're checking to see if we have an error. And remember, this would only be for the logout because we have that send logout mutation and it does have an is error status. So if we have logged out and we have an error, then we're going to apply the error message class, otherwise off screen. So this means we're going to present the error in a different way than we had above. So I'm actually going to put the error just on top of the header. Otherwise, the way we currently have it, it would display inside the header, and that would look kind of weird because the header is constrained to a small area at the very top of the page. If we put the error above the header, it will span the page just on top of the header. So let's do that. We're going to need a fragment to do that because then we'll have 2 different elements underneath as children. So then after the header, we'll close out this fragment as well, and we can save. And now we have our error, and I could even put a space to set them apart. But now we have our error that has the error class we define. So it's typically off screen unless we have an error, and then the error message class applies, and it will display that message across the top of the page. Now notice inside of our content here, we had add more buttons later, and we have our logout button. But I'm actually going to define all of the button content above, and then we'll put that inside of the content. So I'll paste this in, and we can take a look. And now you can see we're also going to change what we do for the is loading that we previously had above. But I'm defining button content. We're checking that is loading status. Again, that only applies if we call that send logout mutation. And if that's what happens, then we have button content equals logging out. Otherwise, the button content is going to equal all of the buttons that we've created if they exist. If they're null, they won't show up. And so either way, we're going to put button content in our content below, so it could display logging out if we have is loading. Otherwise, it will display the button icons that are appropriate for each page that we're on. So now we can scroll down here, we can get rid of this note altogether, and instead of logout button right here, we can just say button content and save. Now we need to go up and remove the is loading and is error that we previously had in our page right here. So we'll remove both of those and we should be good. Let's check it all out in Chrome now. I'll pull Chrome up. Oh, and we have a blank page. We may have an error. Let's drag this over so I can open up DevTools as well and see what's going on. Yep, we'll scroll up to the top to see where the errors start. Okay, cannot read properties of undefined. Reading data at the dash header in 130. I think this has to do with us reading our error if we have one. So let's go back, look at the dash header on line 130. So scrolling down here, and there we are, yep, where the error is displayed. I didn't use optional chaining here, and we're not checking the is error status first. So if we don't have an error, that data property doesn't exist. We need optional chaining there to make this work, and we can save. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the source directory, and then I'm going to right-click and choose Find in Folder, search for error.data to see if I did this anywhere else that will have any possible consequence that I hadn't caught. I do see it in a couple of places. Let's look at those quickly. In the persist login component, I've got error.data and then optional chaining for the message, just like we saw in the other file, but I am checking the is error property here, or I said property value here first. So this would only happen if we do have an error, which would make this okay, but we can be doubly safe just by adding that optional chaining there to the persist login component. Now let's check out in the API slice where it says it has it, but this is where we're setting the value. So this is what we need. We don't want optional chaining here. So this one is fine. Let's go ahead and close that and close the persistent login component as well. Go back to the file tree over here, and I think we're now ready to check everything out inside of Chrome. So let's look. Yep, and Joe is logged in now, and he's got access to the tech notes and add a new tech note, but does not have access to those other links for the user. So all is like we expect, but we're also checking the header now. And notice he has an icon to go to the notes list, or he can log out, because that's all he really has access to. Let's go to the notes list, and he has the notes. And now there's an icon for a new note. And we click that and we go to the new note. Now notice the icon changed back to the notes list. So this is all working as expected. Let's log Joe out and let's log Mark in, who will have access to the users as well because Mark's a manager. Now logging him in, and we can see at the top we have an icon for the notes list or for the user settings. So let's go to user settings. There they are. Now that we're on the user settings page, we can create a new user with this icon or go back to the notes list. So there we go. When we're on the create a new user screen, we can now go to the users list with the user settings icon or the notes list. So let's go back to the users list. Let's go to the notes list. And now we've got a new note icon or the users list. Let's go ahead and create a new note. We're on the new note page. Now we could go back to the notes list or the users list. Let's edit a note. Now we could go to the notes list or the users list. Again, everything seems to be working like we expect it to for Mark as well. And of course, here on the welcome screen, he has access to all of the links too. Let's log Mark out and we'll log back in as Joe. So here's Joe, and he is an employee only, so he should only have access to the notes and the add new tech note. Now let's view the tech notes, and he can see everyone's notes like he's an admin or a manager. So we need to change that as well. So let's go back to the code. Let's close the components directory. Let's look in features, look inside of notes, and we'll choose the notes list JS. Now at the top of notes list JS, we once again need to bring in our use auth hook. And as the component gets started, let's destructure what we need, which is the username, is manager, and is admin. And we'll pull all of those from our use auth hook. Now I'll add an extra line there, and let's scroll down to our is success area where we're destructuring the IDs from notes. Now remember, we're using our entity adapter from Redux and RTK query. And so we have an array of IDs, but we also have entities. So what we want to get here is not just the IDs, but also the entities. So we're destructuring both of those from the notes that we get from our hook above, the use get notes query. We renamed the data notes. So now that we have IDs and entities, we can change this just a little bit, and we will only view Joe's notes because we can filter these. So I'm going to paste this in and we'll go over it. I'm going to create a variable called filtered IDs. Then we're going to check if we have a manager or an admin. The filtered IDs are essentially going to be the same as the actual IDs array, but we're just going to create a new array right here that holds those. So we spread in the IDs array. But else, so if we're Joe and we're not a manager or an admin, then filtered IDs is going to equal the IDs array filtered, where the note ID, each ID passed in, is going to be used on the entities. So we can identify the entity, and we're going to look at that username for that specific note and see if it matches Joe's username. And if it does, it will be included in this filtered IDs array. So then we want to move down and change a little bit of our logic for our table content. I'm going to press Control B to hide the file tree just so we have some more room. I'm going to change this from a ternary too, because I think we can switch this pattern. Let's go ahead and use backspace to remove that, and I'll say if the IDs array has length, then we're going to apply the filtered IDs to map instead of IDs right here. We can also just get rid of this null. We no longer need the ternary because we're using the double ampersands that we see. And I think I can get rid of that parentheses as well. Nope, that one's for map. I do need that. So what we're doing instead of using a ternary is just saying, okay, IDs have length, and then we can filter those IDs and of course apply that to the entity that we did up here. So this is just Joe's post by the time we have filtered IDs right here. Or I said post, it's his notes actually. So we save that, and now when we go to view the notes with Joe's login, we should only see the one note that he currently has. So let's go back and check that out. And yep, only this note is what Joe has access to. Now he can create notes for other people, but then after he creates them, he won't be able to go back and view them because he only has access to the notes that are assigned to him. Now, if we go back as Mark, as a manager, he should be able to see all of those. So let's check that out as well. Now let's look at the tech notes. Mark can still see all of the notes no matter who they're assigned to. So it works either way. Now, of course, as we drag this out and we get a wider screen, we can see more columns here as well. And I think you see who those are assigned to there. But if we open these up now, like if we look at Bob Jones' iPhone title here for his note, it is assigned to Joe. And if we go back to the list and look at Foo City Schools with their laptops to repair, that's assigned to Mark, and so on. So you can see Mark has access to all of these. Okay, we'll log out and let's once again log back in as Joe. And we'll check everything out. Looks good. Tech notes, still just Joe's note. That's all good. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. I'll pull the file tree back up with Control B. And that logic we just changed there with the double ampersands instead of a ternary, I remember one other place we could use that as well. And that was in the users list where we did something very similar. So let me scroll down. We once again have the ID's length. Here we do not need to filter anything, but otherwise we can use that same logic. So let me get rid of the ternary, put the double ampersand in, and then we can get rid of the null as a possible result as well. And this works just as well, and I like the logic just a little bit better. I'm going to bring Chrome back up now, and we're logged back in as Joe, and let me take this to the full screen. And what I want to show is we've applied permissions to several components, and those permissions are applied to the roles instead of any one user, so you can assign as many users as you want to those roles, and that's more efficient. We abstract those permissions away from each individual user to roles, so we have role-based access control. But now I want to highlight that we haven't protected the routes yet. So even though Joe should not have access to the users, really we're just not showing him an icon to get there. So if Joe were to know the address and just type in users, he can still view the users list here. So we need to change that by protecting the routes. Likewise, if I log out entirely now and say I were to try to go to one of these pages and I'm not logged in, we won't be able to see it, but it's not because of a protected route, it's just because of an error that we're getting from our API, the response. And I see we need to add a space there, so let's fix that quickly before we add the protected routes. I'll pull Visual Studio Code back up, and from the last lesson you might remember we were in the app directory working with the API slice. And here I'll press Control B again to hide the file tree so we can see this better. But we had this error message, and I left the extra space here, but that's not the error message we were seeing. We were seeing unauthorized. So that space really isn't helping us out. Let's go ahead and remove that and handle the space somewhere else. So I'll save that, show the file tree again, and now let's go back to our persist login component, and that's what's showing this error data message that we have, and then it shows please log in again. So we need to change this so there's a space, and I can do that by making this a template literal. So I'm going to start with a backtick and then the $ and the curly brace, and then we want to have a curly brace after it all. And I'm going to also put a space and a hyphen and a space actually, so we can separate the error message from our please log in again message, and there'll be a hyphen in between. And then I'll put my closing backtick, and then I need a closing curly brace. Now we'll have that error message and please log in again. So let's save that. Let's go back to Chrome now, and we can see this has changed. So we have our error message, space, a hyphen, or you could call it a dash, and then a space, and then our link to please log in again, which takes us back to the login. And now we've shown the reasons to protect our routes. One, we're really just getting an error. We're going ahead and requesting something from the API even when a user isn't logged in, and we don't want that, even though it returns an error. And then when Joe is logged in, even though he doesn't have the permission to see those icons to take him to the user settings, he can still get there if he knows the address. We need to change all of that by protecting our routes. To protect our routes, we need to create one more component inside of our auth directory. So I'm going to do that and name it require auth with a capital R and a capital A.js. I'll put the imports first. We're going to import use location, navigate, and outlet from React Router. We're also going to import our use auth hook. Then I'll use RAFCE to get our functional component quickly, but this is not going to be what we need here, so I'll just replace that. And here's the content we need. So here we're getting the location from our use location hook, and we're only bringing in the roles array from use auth. Now that we have that, let's define the content. So the content is going to equal this ternary statement, and I'm using the roles array and then the sum method, which means if this is true at least once, this will return true. So if we find one of the roles, that's all we really need. And we also need to pass in the allowed roles, as we see here inside of our sum method here. So let's pass in those allowed roles. And as you can expect, this allowed roles is an array that is being passed in. So now we're calling includes on that, and we're checking each role there. So essentially, if allowed roles includes one of the roles that the user has that we're getting from useauth, then we'll have true, and we'll just return the outlet, which, as you might remember, is all of the children, whatever we're going to wrap this require auth component around. So it is a wrapper to protect whatever we have inside of it, whatever routes, and make sure they're only sent for these allowed roles. Otherwise, we're going to use navigate and send whoever is trying to access a route that they're not allowed to access back to the login page. And what this does, here we have the state, so we get the location from use location, and we're passing that in here as the from for our state. This is a React Router thing. And then we say replace. So we're saying replace this. What we don't want is to have this require auth component in the history. So say Joe tries to access the user settings, and then he would use the back button. If we didn't do this, he would just go back to the require auth and it would send him back to the login again. So his back button essentially wouldn't work. This will ensure it does. So if he's on the, say, the tech notes list, then he tries to access the user settings by typing in the address, it'll send him to the login. But Joe thinks, hey, I'm already logged in, I'm just going to hit the back button. He will be able to do that. So he could back up and be back at the notes list, or he could log in again and that wouldn't hurt anything either. So that's our require auth component, and we're going to use it as a wrapper more than once inside of our app.js. Let's now head over to our app.js. We can close the features directory in the file tree. We haven't looked at the app.js in a little while since we brought in the persist login component in the last lesson at least. But now we've got a couple of things to add here for imports. One would be the require auth component that we just created, but also we need the roles. If you remember, we created a roles object in the config directory before, and we're going to pull those in. Let's look at that real quick just so we can remember what we have there. We have a roles object, and it's got keys and values that actually match. So we have employee, employee, manager, manager, admin, admin. If you went through my Node.js course, you've seen this also where the employee is assigned a number, the manager is assigned a number. This could be different at different companies. This is just what we're doing now, and you'll see how we can still use dot notation to refer to these when it's constructed as an object. And I think that's ideal when we bring this into app.js. So we're also importing that roles object. And now I'm just going to add a comment here for the public routes. So everything is wrapped inside of our original layout that we've talked about in the past. And these first two routes are our public routes. The public can access the home page, of course, that's the public page. And then they can also access the login page because we have a link from there to the employee login. It wouldn't be necessary if all the employees bookmarked it, for instance, and maybe you wouldn't want that on your home page, but we've done it for this project. After that, let's go ahead and add the protected routes. And I'm going to just mark those as well. That's going to be everything after these. So protected routes start here with the persist login that we currently have, and then they're also wrapped in our prefetch component. And then we have a separate dash layout that has that header and footer, and then all the internal routes for that as well. So let's go ahead and mark the end of these as well. So I could mark the end of the protected routes. We don't really need to do that for the public since there's only those two, but the end of the protected routes is going to be down here at the very bottom. So I'll put that right there. And now let's scroll back up and let's protect all of our routes. I'm just going to click here on line 27 and then use Shift Alt and the down arrow, because we want this to be our require auth component, at least our first one that we're going to add. We want it after the persist login because it's going to need that login data to get that from the use auth hook. However, we want it before the prefetch component. So if someone's not authorized, we're not going to go ahead and prefetch that data. There's no reason for that. So let's go ahead and add require auth right here. And now require auth needs to pass the allowed roles in. And the allowed roles is going to be an array. So we're going to create a new array right here by putting in the brackets. And now we can put in each role we want to allow to access the protected routes. Now this is for all of the protected routes, even the welcome. So really all roles should be allowed to view this, at least if they have a role. Likewise, the public should not be able to. So we could put in each individual role, like we could say roles dot, and then you can see we get dot notation. We could choose admin, employee, manager, so we could have roles dot admin, comma, and so on, which is what we will do for another route coming up. But since it takes all of them, we can also say dot dot dot, we're just spreading in, and then say object dot values, and then we'll pass in the roles. And this will just spread in all of the roles inside of that object. Now I'm going to press Control B just to make sure that we close this out. I couldn't see the end of this. Yes, and that looks fine. So we need to go ahead and add one more closing route element here as well. So I'll just click on line 47 and bring that down. Now when I save, we'll get the proper indentation. And now everything should be protected, but it's allowed to all roles. Now let's go ahead and use require auth once again for a nested route, and we need to do that for our users routes. So I'm just going to copy all of this and then we'll change the roles. And I just want to wrap it around the users routes. So I'll bring this down here, paste it here, and I need one more closing route there. And now let's just change the routes, or the actual roles, I mean, that can access the user's routes. So here we'll say roles dot, and a manager can access the users, and then roles dot, and an admin can access the users. So we're passing an array with only those two values. And I see a little red to indicate an error over here from VS Code, and that's because it instantly put a closing route tag there as well, but we have that down below. So now let's save, and we've got the proper indentation again. And now let's go back to Chrome and check everything out. So first we'll log in as Joe. Whoops, I had my caps lock on there and did it the opposite of what I needed. So I need capital J, then OE. Okay, here's Joe's password. We are logged in. He only has access to the notes again, and we see all the proper links. But what about if we try to just go to the user's settings once again? So I'm going to type in /users at the end here, and he gets kicked back out to the login. So that's fine. Let's see if the back button works as expected. Yep, it took him right back to the dash. So that is what we want. Let's go ahead and try to do the same thing now for Mark, who should still be able to access all of the routes. So here's Mark. Let's go to user settings. He can still see the user settings, and he can edit a user. He could probably even create a new user. We can do it with that icon now. Notice the dash class, if you remember us setting that up in the header as well. So when we go to the forms that aren't as wide as the lists, when we take up the full screen, it brings these icons over even with the form. So that's what that class was about. It's just changing the width a little bit. So now if we go back to the user list, they're back over here to the right, taking up the full screen, which is fine. We can see this with notes too, by the way. Let's go in and edit a note. Now our icons are all lined up over here with the form instead of way over here to the right. So everything seems to be working just fine for Mark too, and the routes are good. Let's go ahead and log out now And now let's just try to access those routes and see if we get that error from the API or if we actually just get kicked to the login screen by our require auth component. So we'll say dash and users. Now we're not logged in at all. And we get unauthorized, please log in again, which I believe that does indicate a request is going out. So I'll go back to that. Let's open up DevTools and let's see what we got. Yes, we got the persist login error right here, and there's an error object from the auth API slice. That's all good. Let's check the network request as well. So here we're at the network, and let's try to reload this page. And we hit the refresh, and that's what gives us the error. So that's okay too. And really, this is better than taking someone straight to the login page if they're trying to access something they don't have access to. So now they have to do a little more work, and that's just fine with me. Let's see what happens if we go back to the login page and uncheck trust this device. Now we're not logged in at all. We're on home. I'm going to refresh. Network request is good. Let's go ahead and try that users again. So we're at dash and now users, and we're not checking that stay logged in on the login page. And we get kicked right back to the login, and that's fine too. And that's what I expected the first time. I didn't think about the trust this device. If it was just a public machine and no employees had logged in, maybe a customer logging in on their home computer, and they tried to access a route that was protected, they would just get kicked to the login because they don't have access. A quick final note, I am back here at the user stories, and I was reviewing those, and notes can only be deleted by managers or admins. I realized we skipped over that one. So let's go ahead and finish that before this lesson is over. We should go to the features and then the notes directory, and now we should go to edit note.js and then edit note form.js, and this is where we will actually work with that trash can icon and only let it appear for managers and admins. So I'm going to paste in our use auth hook once again as the import, and then from there we're going to destructure what we need, and that is manager and is admin. And I'll set this equal to use auth and pull that from the hook. I should mention, as you might have already noticed, the manager can access everything the admin can at this point in the app. And really our user stories don't require for more than that. However, I'm providing each because there could be additions in the future. We're just making it flexible. Possibly we tie this into a ticketing financial app or something like that. Something that Dan, our stakeholder, wants to add in the future. So it's still good to have that separation between managers and admins, so we're just building it in now. Okay, after we've brought in the is manager and is admin status, we need to scroll down, and I'm going to scroll down till we're underneath our content here for the error and everything we've created. There we go. Between the error content and the regular content, I'm going to define our delete button. I'll just paste that in and we can go over it. It has the same pattern you've seen before, so we have let delete button and it equals null, but then if we are a manager or an admin, the delete button then has some content, and of course it calls the on delete note clicked. So let's scroll down into our code now, and we can replace where we originally had that delete button, which was right here. So we'll just grab all of that, backspace, and I'll put our delete button right there and save. Now this should not be available to Joe, but it should be available to Mark and our stakeholder Dan. So let's check that out now inside of Chrome. I'll pull Chrome up and let's view, we're logged in as Joe. So let's view the tech notes. Pulled up Joe's only tech note right now, and if we go to the edit form, he has a save button, but not a delete button, and that's what we wanted to see. So now let's log out and check the same for Mark. Sign back in, go to tech notes. Let's go ahead and look at any one of these notes. Let's look at Joe's again. So Mark can delete Joe's tech note if he needs to. So that's what we needed there for that last user story. So we have made a lot of progress today, and I think we're through most of our user stories. We can check off more of those in the next lesson. And also in the next lesson, we'll be doing a little bit of code review and refactor, and then we'll deploy everything, the back end and the front end, as we wrap up our MERN Stack project series.